the disequilibrium theory of price formation will begin.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, each lecture has its own preferences. I don't mind if you interrupt me with questions as we go, if it's pertaining to this discussion, but I understand there will be questions which will be on. I will try to set aside a 10-minute or maybe 15-minute period at the end of this lecture for questions outside of this topic, just for your information. So I'm not trying to ignore questions which do not pertain directly to this one. We will have a chance. And if it's time to not, then we'll find time later on as we go. Now I'm waiting for a quick chart. Right now. In the meantime, I start with this thought that my interest in economics goes beyond the theory of interest. It goes to the very roots, the very beginnings of economics. And I should declare who my hero is. My hero is Karl Menger, an Austrian who was born in 1840, died in 1921. He is recognized today as the founder of the Austrian School of Economics. But since I do not belong to the Austrian school because they have disowned me, they have monopolized Karl Menger and a lot of other things, I just have to declare my allegiance not to the Austrian school, but to Karl Menger directly. A little bit of background about Karl Menger. He is very much like a figure, like the historical figure of Aristotle. Certainly his grasp on philosophy, history, and knowledge is comparable to that of Aristotle. A modern Aristotle, I would call him. And there is another interesting historical analogy. As you recall, Aristotle was the personal tutor to Alexander the Great. At the time, he was still a youth. His father, Philip, the king of Macedonia, appointed Aristotle, here is my son, he's going to take over the ground from me when I'm going to withdraw from day-to-day politics, and I want him to have all the knowledge which exists today, and your job is to impart it to him. Well, I don't know the exact words how Karl Menger was appointed as the tutor to the Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria. He was the son of the Kaiser, the Austrian Kaiser, Franz Joseph. And this was a rather sad story, ill-fated story. According to the official version, he committed suicide with his lover, who he was not allowed to marry because she was a whore. He was locally born Aristotle. These things were very close to control. But anyhow, as a youth, he was personally tutored. Rudolf, Crown Prince Rudolf, was tutored by Karl Menger, even to the extent of traveling incognito, in other words, without, probably under assumed names, traveling in Western Europe, including England, France, the periphery, and Caramander was explaining the world as it was, or as he knows it, as he knew it, to the young Crown Prince, and he left a deep impression on him, and his basic outlook, Caramanga's basic outlook was that of pessimism. He was a visionary, and he did realize, remember this was still in the the last few years of the 19th century, he realized that Western civilization is doomed. And as he saw it, it was doomed because of its finances going to self-destruct. That was his basic outlook, and he imparted this pessimism to his young charge, the Crown Prince. Because this relationship, tutor and student, lasted for at least 10 years, so there was lots of time. And according to some historians, this also played a large part in the death of the Crown Prince, whether he was genuine suicide or he was helped is another question. We don't have to enter that. But he was also a pessimist. He was not looking forward to taking over as one of the then very few great powers, which Austria-Hungary was at the time. Great history, great monarchy, the House of Habsburgs going back to at least 800 years. And rather than looking forward to the chance of taking over the realm and putting his ideas into practice, he just shuddered the idea, and it never came to be. Be that is as it may, we don't know, and we are not investigating this. The fact is that I like this historical background, and I like the analogy between Caramander and Aristotle, and I can read it to you and to others to know what happened. Crown Prince Rudolf would have become a modern Alexander the Great. Probably the world would have looked different from what it is. But we are not going to enter this. It's just a nice thought, speculative dream. We have to face reality. So my hero is modern Aristotle, Caramander. One of the, that is important. I meant to tell you before he became the tutor to the Crown Prince. You can imagine what kind of betting you would have to undergo if you were going to become the future emperor. You know? So that is an interesting question how Manger, who was a commoner, he was not an aristocrat or anybody of high birth, he was just an academic. And in those days, the governments didn't run huge economic departments, research and statistics and all that. But there was this very small office attached to the office of the Prime Minister of Austria, which was following the markets, looking at what happened in the various markets, stock markets and other markets in those days. And through his academic advancement, Menger became today we would call him the chief economist of that office attached to the prime minister's office. But it didn't mean a desk and an army of secretaries and what have you. It meant that you just had to go every day to the floor of the exchange and make observations, and if something strange occurred to you, you should make a report and let the prime minister know. So that was the kind of job he had as a young economist. He was present on the floor of the stock exchange and other markets every day and making observations. And the budding theorist came out, it was an applied job, it was not a theoretical job, but he was a born theorist, and the first thing he observed was that the whole outlook on the markets in economics, as it existed then, was just wrong, plain wrong, because the markets were not working on the principle of equilibrium of supply and demand. On the contrary, he said markets were working on the principle of disequilibrium. So I'm going to cross out the first one, because he dismissed this. Supply, demand, equilibrium analysis meant nothing to him. He said the market followed its own rules, and this was disequilibrium. Exchange takes place not because of equilibrium and the mechanism brings about an equilibrium price at which people, buyers and sellers, exchange goods. Just the contrary. And there has to be a disequilibrium because both the buyer and the seller must have a benefit. Zero benefit is not going to create exchange. Only when both benefit. So there has to be a basic disequilibrium. And the way he described it was through the ask price and the bid price. Just think of any market. Horse market was the typical example, the prototype of all markets in those days. No cars, but horses were just as important, if not more important, than the automobile of today. So if you take the horse market, people trade horses not because there is an equilibrium, but because there is a disequilibrium. There will be an ask price and there will be a bid price. Now, if they are too far away, there will be no trade. But if arbitrage makes this spread between the higher, this is the higher, this is the lower. If arbitrage will close this gap, couldn't completely close it, but makes it smaller, then at one point there will be an advantage to the buyer to buy at the ask price and the seller to sell at the bid price. And there are market makers in between. I'm not going to discuss this in full, but this is the true story of economics, which you won't find in too many textbooks today. It's a pity, because that's the truth here. And this is my starting point. This is thesis of Karl Menger, who completely revolutionized economic thinking, building on the disequilibrium theory of Marx. So, this and the following. Austrian economics adopted this, and this is pretty well worked out, originally by Menger himself, and then by the followers of Menger. It's very well known and discussed, and there are good books available where you can learn this. But what is not discussed, and what even Menger didn't live long enough to work out, was the flip side of the theory as applied to the rate of interest. And that was missed for very strange reasons. And that is something which I still find difficult to explain. Now, all the market analysts, the financial analysts, realize this, and you don't have to waste too many words for them to explain. But they all realize that the rate of interest on the one hand and the bond price on the other are very rigidly related. And in fact, they are related what I prefer to call the seesaw effect. Remember the seesaw? This is the name of what's the word? Not children play. They get a long beam with a fulcrum. It looks like balance scale. And one chance is in one end or the other. So one chance goes up, the other has to go down. I refer to the seesaw when I refer to the rate of interest. The bond price is one end of the seesaw, and the rate of interest is the other. And this is the rigid relationship between the two. Any financial analyst will immediately agree with you, and we won't have to worry about provoking resistance. But strangely enough, if you talk to academic economists, it's a blank there. You're hitting a wall. They don't agree with that. They don't even agree that the rigid relationship exists. Because they say, well, the interest rate is one thing, the bond price is another, and sometimes there might be influences on one which don't influence the other, and so on. So it's obfuscation, really, rather than finding the truth. You are making it even more confused. And this I don't quite understand. And I must say, even the Austrians make that mistake. Mises himself, Ludwig von Mises, is another hero of mine, but I came to acquire a reputation being a critique of Mises, and that's, of course, a no-no, because if you do that, it's a sacrilege. idol. So, but I'm not an iconoclast, so I just have to say that Mises says that interest is not a market phenomenon. You see, this view, the seesaw, is shifting the theory of interest right into the lap of market theory. Because, yes, interest is a market phenomenon. The flip side is the rate of interest. The flip side is the bond price. This is rigid. As rigid as it can be mathematically in an economic theory. But since the Bible said no, well, we just have to set the repeat what the Bible said. And the Bible was written by Ludwig von Mises. I'm sorry, I have to live with being a heretic or schismatic or whatever you want to call me, but I just suggested to you that if Menger lived long enough, he lived long enough, he lived to be 81, but if you give him another 10 years, I think he would have worked it out, and it would be there in his collected works that the theory of interest is another market phenomenon, and not only that, but if the equilibrium theory of markets doesn't apply to commodity prices, then it won't apply to the bond price either. And if it doesn't apply to the bond price, then of course it doesn't apply to the rate of interest. So if you want to understand interest, I deeply believe Menger would have spelled it out for us, then you have to get away from this idea that equilibrium theory helps you to understand. It does not. There is no such a thing as a monolithic bond price. Just as there is no monolithic price for the horse, a certain age, quality, type, whatever. What there is an ask price for the bond and a bid price for the bond. And because of the seesaw, the ask price, which is the higher of the two, corresponds to the floor of the rate of interest, and the bid price, which is the lower, corresponds to the ceiling. So as the bond price fluctuates between the ask price and the bid price, so does the rate of interest fluctuate between the floor and the ceiling with the opposite signature. When the bond price is up, interest rate goes down, and so on. This is what you have to see. And as I say, if you talk to any number of financial analysts, you immediately catch on and understand what you are talking about. But if you talk to academic economists, then you run against a brick wall. But that's just the fact, that's just too bad. But we have this equilibrium theory of price formation, which is accepted by and large the profession of the economists, as applicable to the commodity markets, but not accepted when it comes to theory of interest. Too bad. But it gives us a chance to cut through a jumble of misconceptions and misinterpretations and obfuscation and what have you. But that is the approach. This is what I'm advocating. And since I'm condensing this a little bit, I just mention the highlights. All right? This reminds me of the story of the American billionaire in the old days when it was still a privilege to fly. It's no longer. Well, maybe again. Be as it may, this millionaire, say in the early 30s or 20s or whatever, hired a plane and he wanted to see Europe, a grand tour of Europe. So there they were flying and the guide pointed out, you see that point there, that's Paris. That point, that's Venice. And there's Rome not far from it, and so on. And then the millionaire said, skip the details, mention the highlights only. So I'm skipping the details and mentioning the highlights only. The first consequence of the duality of the ask and bid price is that there will be arbitrage. Strangely, that's another word, arbitrage, a French word, but it's perfect legitimacy in the English language as well, but not in economics textbook, because you look up textbooks or treatises and you don't find arbitrage, or if you do, then it's just barely mentioned. It's treated in an offhand manner, far from being edited. Now, I think arbitrage deserves more than just a highlight. It deserves going into details. Now, the second thing is that you have to look at the markets which trade futures. And this means you can sell commodities in the futures market and buy commodities. But it's better to look at this as commitments to buy and commitment to sell. Because the first question people say, and they throw their hands up, how can you sell something you don't own? Well, look at it as a commitment. You are not selling grain which you don't own, but you are selling a commitment that you will deliver grain at a definite price at a definite future. So we are not entering that controversy, we just accept that there is such a thing as buying and selling commitments. So there will be spreads between us. If you have a commitment to buy, then you are long. If you have a commitment to sell, then you are short. It's a market term, makes it simple to refer to these future transactions. And the point is this, and this is a point which is not recognized by mainstream economics. Most positions in the markets are not straight long position or short position. The overwhelming majority of positions is what they call straddle position. And the word straddle comes from riding. You're riding a horse, you have a straddle. Left leg, right leg, but you don't call them left leg and right leg, you call them the short leg and the long leg. And you know what we mean by these terms. The short leg is your commitment to sell, and the long leg is your commitment to buy. And this is actually for the purpose of reducing risks, because these two markets in which you have the short leg or the long leg are related, sometimes very tenuous relationship, but the relationship exists all the same. And therefore, if you have a violent move in one market, this will be compensated for an offsetting opposite move in the other. So you have reduced the risk of an outright long position or an outright short position. that is the correct way of looking at the markets. That you don't have so-called naked positions, whether short or long. You have most of the time, and most of the traders have a balanced position, which means have a spread, which has a short leg and a long leg. A related word is, so spreads and straddles are related words. Spread is the difference between prices, and straddle is a market position with two legs, short and long. Now, very often, both legs are in the same market. And spread is a straightforward difference between the ups and the price. But not always, because the long and short legs could be in different markets, but which have some relationship to one another. An example which comes to mind is the so-called soybean complex in the Chicago Board of Trade, which has several components, not just two, but there is the soybean itself, which is being traded by the bushel, and then the soybean oil, I think, and the soy meal, which is fodder for animal raising animals. Now these are obviously related. They can go in opposite direction. One goes up, the other goes down, but only to a certain extent, because very soon some fundamental facts will put them back into adjustment. So that shows that not all spreads are in the same market, not all straddles are in the same market, they could be in different markets. So that was one of the highlights. Here is another. In addition to two-legged straddles, you can have four-legged straddles as well. And that refers to the most common type of arbitrage. The two forward legs are in the futures market, and the two hind legs in the cash market. So here you have short and long futures, and short and long in the cash market. And that is a very common thing. All grain elevators do that, feedlot operators do that. Texas Frenchmen do that, famous of Texas straddle, to putting on two long legs and going with the straddle, which is not. Well, that's what they do in Texas, according to anecdotes. All right, so there are the four-legged straddles. And ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, there is such a thing as a one-legged straddle as well. You may not agree with that immediately, but there is such a thing. And it's actually a very common thing. You just have to think of the housewife who is doing shopping. And when she does, she looks at the price and the quality and whatever is promised in the advertisement and so on and so forth. And then, for putting this information together, the housewife decides to shift custom from one brand to another. She is replacing one product with a very similar product at a different price, different quality, and so on. This is a one-legged straddle, Because what she's not buying is her short leg. And what she's buying is her long leg. Now, I'm not going to try to convince you any more than just putting the idea to you. You can think about that. And it's perhaps not even the housewife whose example is the most important. You have to think of a producer producing a certain type of good which is in great demand. And on the input level, the producer is constantly looking around for substitutes. And if she finds a better product or a cheaper product, she tries to replace it so that her production cost could be lowered. He may be selling at the same or even a better price. So this is really very important, and it brings the whole economic picture to life. It's no longer a snapshot, it's no longer a static picture. It becomes a movie picture, and it will be not a black and white picture either. It will be a movie picture with living colors. If you want to do that, you have to replace rigid input, rigid output with ideas like four-legged struggle, two-legged or one-legged. Now, whether it's two or four or one, there's no such thing as three-legged struggle. I'm glad to report. So just stay with the three cases, 1, 2, and 4. In bringing these in, you get away from a static view and you have a fully dynamic view of production, consumption, trade, and so on, which is the basis of economics. Throw out equilibrium theory, put in this equilibrium theory, and then you will realize that the market is dynamic, and there is a way how theory can capture this dynamism and work it in and make it mesh, as well as the glove fits the hand, if you work with these concepts: arbitrage, spread, straddle, and so on. By and large, you might say this is in Menger, but when you try to apply these ideas to the one market, which means try to apply these ideas to the theory of interest, terra incognita, it's, as the old cartographers used to say, this part of the world we can't put on the map because this is terra incognita. It's not known. That's where the cannibals live or whatever. So I am happy to report to you this is not the case. Terra incognita if you ignore it, but it's terra cognita if you want to know it. There's a way to know it with the proper approach, bringing in arbitrage. And this is what you have to do if you want to develop a proper understanding of interest. So the bottom line of this discussion, and I realize I promised you 10 minutes for the discussion, so I'm trying to wind this down a little. Instead of explaining one monolithic market price, the economists have a job to explain two. It's not a good exchange. Instead of saying one, you have to explain two. That's the way it is if you want to understand what's going on. And that means you will want to discuss the formation of the ask price separately, and the formation of the bid price, again, quite separately. And don't allow the two to interfere, because that's going to lead you astray. It's going to lead you back to the equilibrium theory which we have already discussed. So once you have a proper theory of how the ask price is formed by the market process and how the bid price is formed, then you have to have theory to understand why the spread between these two prices has to close. Because there will be market makers who try to buy at the lower bid price and sell at the higher ask price. And this is an immediate profit for them if they that's not as easy as it sounds. These market makers have to be very smart, and they have to understand what's happening in the larger picture. But in every market you have them. If you didn't have them, the market would phase out, it just wouldn't work. Equilibrium and co-equilibrium, I'm saying co-equilibrium, but even fall back to equilibrium again. The market maker is indispensable. So what their job is to bring the two prices, the bid and ask price, close enough together so there will be trading. And the market will be liquid, and there will be plenty of supply, plenty of demand, and they will meet. And any kind of discrepancy will be adjusted not through changing supply or demand, but through encouraging the ask and bid price to move in the right direction. So it's 10 more minutes. Let's have a discussion. I promised you I'll take questions on any topic which has to do with my publications on the internet or anywhere else you have seen them. And I will ask my chairman to take questions from the floor.
Yes, sir. A clarification question first. If I heard you correctly, you said that a lot of economists don't even agree with the simple idea of falling interest rates resulting in a rise in bond price. And you said they try and throw up enough to compensate. What sort of other elements do they have affect bond prices as an example? What are they trying to cloud the issue?
I mentioned one already, which is Ludwig von Mises. He has a very rigid theory, almost dogmatic, which says that interest is not a market phenomenon. Interest is a moral imperative or something which is given, that every future good is apodictically, remember the catchword, the old
Last year.
apodictically valued at a lower level than exactly the same present good. And interest is an outcome of this basic fact, which is shifting the thing away from the market to philosophy. But I have lots of counterexamples. It's not always true that the market values future good at a lower level than exactly the same quantity and quality of good present good. And I think it would take too much time to go into detail. But you know the English word dovetail? These markets are dovetailed, and they have to, if you have production or consumption, you have various factors coming together. And if the timing is following the blueprint 100%, then there's no loss, and it will be true, as Mises says, that the future value is going to be lower than the corresponding present value. However, in practice, there is always mishaps, and the delivery of the factors will not perfectly dovetail. And when they don't, then there will be losses. And these losses could in fact result in the present value being the lower of the two as compared to the future. Why? Because these two important ingredients don't reach the destination at the right time, and then they'll be subject to losses. So let me just leave it at that. Now that was the big theoretical objection. But then the non-Austrians would say, oh, after all, the one market, it could be subject to foreign exchange deviation or capital movements and so on. And then they bring in a lot of irrelevant considerations until they confuse the main point, which is crystal clear, so badly that you don't see the forest from the trees. And that is the present situation.
Yes.
Earlier you mentioned there was a four-legged straddle which had one long position in the future.
Would you speak up a little?
Yeah, a little louder.
Earlier you mentioned you had a four-legged straddle which had a long position in futures and a long position in cash, and a short position in futures market and a short position in cash market. What I wanted to ask was, how do you have a short position in the cash market? What's an example?
You just took away four-legged stool.
Four-legged stool.
Yeah, two.
And the cash market.
How do you have a short
Can you have a
position?
short position? Well, this means simultaneous buying and selling in the cash market. For example, you are operating an alligator, where at harvest time you fill your bins with various commodities. Okay? But at the same time, you hedge. So when you buy in the cash market, you sell in the future. You see? Now, when the time comes to cash in and sell the cash trade, then you have to lift your short leg in the future market.
Yep.
You see? So you simultaneously hedge when you buy the cash trade, and you simultaneously de-hedge when you sell the cash trade. So the four legs actually do exist, and they are very distinct, and you can see that. Okay?
Don't quite understand.
Well, we will have panel discussion on Sunday, I think it's Sunday, and we will discuss the basis, and we have another chance to talk about this in more detail. In the meantime, you just bear with us. Okay.
Just going back to gold, on a sunny day, it's inactive to determine a simple product, a bond product, by simple fundamentals, judging by the government, ability to pay, how much is the interest rate on a sunny day. But as market development comes, you have to see the alternative costs, the other countries' bonds, other stuff. That's why by 98, the big one fund went bust. So on the gold theory, do you come also on a conclusion later on that not just determining whether right or wrong, but whether survives between the other products? I mean, you speak of interest, where you come from interest, but on the theory you have, we would like to see not just concentrating on gold, but on gold according to the other stuff as well. You don't get my point. So the relative pricing, the portfolio pricing.
Because asking if gold doesn't accept itself compared to other accepted assets.
I think he's talking about the other factors that deal with the bond pricing, okay, that are active in the market, okay? And are you just asking if this is possible or if it affects his theory?
No, it affects his theory because I understand you go back to the roots. But as in biology, that from the root there is evolution, so there was one simple species, that's why the derivatives came. Mathematics master derivatives, but that's why they employed physicians to master the derivatives, because they are simple nature laws, like there are other markets influencing those types of products, and then we know that the heat wave can, just different mathematics you use mastered on derivatives as well, on a portfolio basis. But now, speaking of that, we have these crises like first financial products versus in biology, so that once they evolve, those products can give you good returns in the long run, survive the other products, the other stuff doesn't. So, if we go forward in time with this lecture, do we evolve the place that you will die with? It's not just here to stay, but it's an alternative.
Let me just say that I am basically a mathematician. I was trained as a mathematics physics teacher in this country way back before the 1956 revolution. So I'm thoroughly familiar with this argument that mathematics and physics has a lot to add to the theory of bond price and so on. But I'm sorry to cut this train of thought short right there and then, because I don't think mathematics or physics has anything to contribute to the theory of interest whatsoever. For the following reason, I already touched on that in your introduction. The reason is that I have to distinguish between two types of risks, and this is very rigid. It's black and white, and there are no colors and transitions or talking circles around. There are risks given by nature. We can do nothing about it. We don't know what the weather will be tomorrow. We don't know what the gold price will be tomorrow. If we did, we wouldn't be sitting here. If we knew what the gold price was going to be tomorrow, we would just run out and buy or sell and make a living that way. Well, nobody sees the future. So for that reason, there are such things as risks existing in nature. And then there are risks which are man-made, artificially. Some admit openly that we have a casino, and the casino creates risks. And somebody came to me, who was it, during one of these breaks, suggesting that you were, okay, your name?
John.
Okay, wonderful remark. Could you repeat it?
Basically, my comment was that if they were to admit that it was really gambling, they would also have to admit that the house always wins.
So, as simple as that. But the fact is that there is no way to talk you out of this thing. Whether you admit it or not, the risks are not nature given. The risks are man-made. Of course, governments don't want you to see this, and therefore they encourage, pump a lot of money into departments of economics to build up huge research staff and so on to prove that speculation, yes, can control the bond price or interest rates or this or that, for even foreign exchange rates. This is a lie, it's a lie, and 100 times it's a lie. The fact is that these risks are not nature given, they are man-made. Why? Because under the gold standard, foreign exchange rates, interest rates, and a whole lot of other things are fairly constant, lacking volatility to the extent that you don't have to have laws outlawing speculation. The speculators will just exempt themselves. There's not enough. They size up the situation. There's not enough volatility in this market. I want to touch it to the 10th. Because my only interest in this is profits. I mean, there's no volatility, no profit, period. That's it. So the risk is man-made, whether the government admits it or not. And for that reason, all this paraphernalia from physics, mathematics, chemistry, whatever you want to bring it in, is inapplicable. There is no way to predict how the human brain will operate. There are values and values. And these are not governed by physical. They are influenced by physical factors, but not governed.
Yeah, if it's nature-made, you cannot trick it. If it's man-made, you can trick the system then.
That's a very good point. I appreciate you brought it up. But that's a huge field. You know, it's philosophy.
Okay.
It's philosophy.
I just wanted to jump over
A
that.
huge field. It's very close to my heart.
Any more questions?
One more, maybe theoretical for the point that we're talking about today, but is it possible, when you said the bid-ask spread, if it's too wide, no transactions take place, as it gets narrower, eventually you can start having premium. Is there any sort of general formula you can write to estimate how close it needs to be as a percent of the value of something, or is a formula like that even possible or desirable? Would it help?
That depends on a lot of outside factors. For instance, a new invention. First, very few people know, but it will affect the ask price or the bid price. And those who have the information can act on it first. And that could work the other way around. For instance, peak oil. It doesn't dawn upon people at first that we are near or past peak oil. So we just go on with our gas guzzlers and all kinds of wasteful treatment of energy until the spread will be too great for people to be able to buy gasoline at the pump, which is what we have come to. And you can think of your pet example. These are just examples off the top, but there are lots of examples. So in order to find a mathematical formula where the spread will kick in for trade is, I think, what's the word? We are pursuing.
It's not worth.
It's probably worth it. Would be worth it if you could pursue it. But it's very difficult because there's so many unpredictable factors who come in. By the time we material out of it, the ground shifts again. So I would say probably the answer is it's not a profitable way to proceed.
I didn't understand why this of the state would stop an exchange. Isn't the ask price of the buyer willing to pay a high price, and the bid price of the seller willing to pay the seller a low price? It's just negotiating what price trading happened in both benefit.
I think that
The bid is about
Easily the ask price of the buyer will be the seller. Because obviously if they're part, then they pay the seller and the seller switches around. I mean, that's an honest of all economics, is that through the exchange both parties benefit.
Are you bringing the basis here?
No, not bringing the basis.
Okay.
Just the ask price is the buyer.
Well, I would say 90%.
other way around.
Right? If it's the other way around, then the exchange would never happen until the close is completed.
90% of participants have to buy at a higher ask price and have to sell at the lower bid price. But there is 10% of market makers who make it their business trying to buy at the lower bid price and sell at the ask price. They are on the floor. They are the first ones, and then they are the best informed participants.
So that's
As they act. And that's how they make their bread and butter. That's how they make their profit.
But if I read Mises and Menger, isn't it where the difference is such that the benefit of the exchange is that the horse is worth, to the one selling the horse, it's worth a lesser amount than what it is to the buyers.
He's bringing it back to Menger's and Mises' theory of interest on horses.
For the pricing.
Pricing, just on pricing.
I'm saying exchange happens because of the disequilibrium, because it is worth more to the other party than,
What market are you talking about? Say
say the horses, say the price of the horse.
horses.
Say the price of the horse.
Okay.
And an exchange will happen because the buyer values the horse more than the seller values the horse. So in that spread, the ask price is the price of the buyer, and the bid price is the seller.
Well, if the sellers of horses don't adjust their ask price, then they won't be able to sell. And if the buyers don't adjust their bid price, they won't be able to buy. Most of the transactions, it's a mistake to think that all transactions take place either at the ask price or at the no. Most transactions take place somewhere in between. These are extremes. And there is a lot of variation. So the actual which trade exchanges take place are somewhere in between, and they are changing continuously. What lends stability to the market is these extremes. They also change, but at a different level. They change because the sellers or the buyers adjust. They realize that their ask and bid price is not realistic. They make adjustments. And then the arbitrators enter it, and at one point there will be liquidity and trading will start. I've written a lot more on this, and it exists in print. And as I say, we are just skipping the details.
Because I was just thinking the other right, the ceiling and the floor concept. For example, of the interest rate, but it doesn't mean that it's a part, in the sense that even if that's wide, it just represents a ceiling and a floor within to which transactions do take place. So I couldn't understand why widespread stops a transaction taking place.
Well, it's just if
Too high.
It's sometimes an extreme. I think he's saying, why would an extreme high, extreme low stop the process from equal or meeting, just because it's a large spread?
Well, maybe it won't stop it, but the exchange is so sporadic as becoming insignificant. I mean, you know that you can sometimes pick up a real estate at an extremely good price. You were lucky. Or sell at an extremely good. You were lucky. But you can't make a theory out of being lucky. So let's not be rigid about this. A wide exchange will thin out trade. And it will thin trade out drastically. So that for practical purposes, you might say the market has frozen up. There's no more trade. They have to do something. Buyers and sellers have to do something. They won't be able to adjust supply and demand because they exist already, and they are not so easy to influence in the short term. But what they can change is their ask and the price, and they do change it. And as they do, then they could bring back liquidity and
Okay, we may be confusing the issue because as I understood from many, it's just that I think in the opposite sides, you obviously see it as in the market asking the goods price, whereas also when you're coming into a market, it's the other way around for the exchange.
But as I say, if you're interested in this, I appreciate that, I welcome this, and there's a lot more I've written on this, which I can give you the reference to it. Most of it is on the internet anyhow. Are you familiar with my website? Okay, so, there's a lot there. Unfortunately, it's not very well organized in the sense that I don't have an index that you just say bid price, ask price, and because you just have to be a little bit familiar with what I have written, and then you find bits and pieces here and there. I wish I had time to make a little index, and we didn't have, never. Maybe now I can find that thanks to the spot price.
If you trade stocks, you'll have business.
No, I don't understand. I agree with that. But I was talking of the theory of Menger.
Oh,
Because there you go to exchange because the seller wants to give more to the buyer than what to the seller. It's the opposite way around. I thought that's what
When is the
Jude, when is lunch, Jude?
Lunch is at 1.
At 1?
At 1. And dinner will be at 7.
Okay.
For tomorrow it is ordered by 7:30.
other question?
In the restaurant at 7:30.
All right, and we'll have lunch at 1 and be back at 2:30 for the message.